Hello, everyone. It's great to have so many of you joining from across the nation. My name is Shytance Wren, and I'm a policy analyst for Education Commission of the States. I want to thank you for attending this webinar on valuing non-degree credentials in state policy. We have a great discussion in store for you today with the ECS team and our partner, the Strada Education Foundation. Please note that we are recording the webinar today to allow you to revisit the content as well as share with your colleagues. And if you're joining us for the first time, Partnering for Success is designed to provide you, our commissioners and policymakers, with opportunities for connection with peers, researchers, and innovators who are providing solutions to some of today's most pressing education policy issues. We intend for you to leave these webinars filled with insight, inspiration, and resources that will support you as you address similar challenges in your state. On behalf of the ECS team, I'd like to thank our partners who help make events like this one possible. Thank you for your continued partnership and support that allows us to convene the people behind the policy. I'm especially pleased to join forces with the Strada Education Foundation for today's important conversation on non-degree credentials. This is the first session in our three-part webinar series presented in partnership with Strada, who has long been a national leader in strengthening education to employment pathways, and their work continues to illuminate how non-degree credentials can expand opportunity when thoughtfully aligned with workforce demands. This discussion is also occupied by a blog entitled Data That Drives Effective Use of Non-Degree Credentials, which offers a closer look at how states can build better data ecosystems to support high quality, high value credentials. So I encourage you to check it out. There should be a link in the chat where you can read the blog. As we move through the session today, we want to hear from you as well. So as you follow along, please be sure to place your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Strada's Chief Data Ecosystem Officer, Jon Furr, who will guide us through the discussion. Jon leads efforts to improve access to education and workforce data. He is a national expert in career pathways and data systems. He founded Ed Systems, developing Illinois' longitudinal data system and regional collaboratives. He has also consulted on national data initiatives and serves on boards for work-based learning and international education. Overall, Jon has been instrumental in building stronger, more integrated data ecosystems that help states and institutions make informed policy decisions. Please join me in welcoming Jon. Jon, thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this conversation today and to have all of you with us. So, just to kind of provide a few framing comments, I know that from Strada's perspective is we are focused on the overall connection between post-secondary education and training to opportunity. We've really seen a need to focus on non-degree credentials, which are a key pillar of our nation's post-secondary and workforce system. We see the number of learners that are earning non-degree credentials is growing at a rate of more than 4 times of traditional degrees. And yet we also know that way too little is known about who is earning non-degree credentials and also what are the outcomes and what's the impact of these pathways to the workforce. So we have a really fantastic panel today to dig into this topic. Looking forward to a lot of good conversations and looking forward to your questions as well. So we have, to kind of start us off today, Michelle Van Noy, who's the director of the Education and Employment Research Center at the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers. Michelle has more than 20 years of experience conducting research on education in the workforce, focused on credentials, community colleges, and connections between higher education and the labor market, and is currently leading a number of studies on technician education and economic development and state non-credit education data, non-degree credential quality, and student decision-making about programs and careers. Also very excited to have Dr. Shannon Gilkey, who's the Rhode Island Commissioner of Postsecondary Education. Commissioner Gilkey is a strong proponent of postsecondary ed and is as a springboard to meaningful careers that are essential for Rhode Islanders to increase their earnings and to help business leaders sustain and grow the Rhode Island economy. He is committed to developing a robust talent pipeline that is well educated and that is known to improve the quality of the state and the New England region. Commissioner Gilkey has a broad range of experiences, including more than 19 years of service in education, 14 of those in higher ed, with specific leadership in developing and leading implementation of institutional, state, and national efforts. Thank you very much, Dr. Gilkey, for being with us. And also, again, very pleased to have Jon Ferrell, who is currently serving as the Chief Deputy of School and District Transformation at the Mississippi Department of Education. And in this role, Jon leads a newly established office designated to support and improve the state's most challenged schools and districts. This office is also in charge of workforce development and career and technical education in the state. And with a strong background in career and technical education, workforce development, and district leadership, Mr. Ferrell brings both strategic vision and practical experience to the work of school improvement. Again, please join me in welcoming this fantastic panel. So what I really like to start off, though, as we move forward into this conversation today, is to turn to Michelle. And I know, Michelle, we know that you've been doing some incredible national work that we've been partnering with you on in around non-credit data and some of the challenges with that. So, Michelle, we'll turn to you for some opening comments just to kind of frame this issue for our discussion today.
Sure. Thanks, Jon, for having me here and for the chance to share the work that we've been doing with states. I think we've been tracking this issue for quite some time. I mean, just the prevalence of non-credit education and the lack of data to help us measure and understand what it is. And so our state non-credit data project was something born out of conversations, actually, technical review panels for iPads years ago, actually, where we were talking about, how can we possibly measure non-credit? We don't have definitions, we don't know what's possible. And we realized that there were some states that were already doing this. And we said, let's go take a look at the states and learn from what they're doing. And that sort of sparked the project. And so we began with 3 states that we knew had established non-credit data systems. That was Iowa, Louisiana, and Virginia. And we started by just sort of taking an inventory of what data they were able to collect, what they were measuring, how they were defining those measures, and did a sort of just a little study of each state, documenting the data that they have. And at the same time, I think also looking at these data as an opportunity to really understand the landscape of non-credit, what non-credit is. I think if there's anything that we know is that non-credit is quite variable. And so part of this process is just better understanding how we can describe it so we can better understand what kind of outcomes we might expect non-credit programs to lead to. But so our work with those first 3 states allowed us to begin to put together a data taxonomy that begins to show off some sort of common elements and common definitions for different non-credit data elements. And so that was the sort of beginning of the project. And then, as this went further, we began to expand to other states that were in different stages of development in terms of their non-credit data systems. So that included Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And we realized too, I mean, one thing also to be, clear about too, is that developing non-credit data is kind of an ongoing journey. That's what my colleague on the project, Mark D'Amico, often refers to it as a sort of non-credit data journey that states are. It's not just one sort of end point. That states are sort of, there's an ongoing process for developing and creating these data. If that's anything we've learned from some of our partners, is just that there's many elements to add, and it takes some time in many cases to get to where they want to be. But so we worked with states that were beginning and launching new data collection efforts for non-credit, like Maryland, for example. We looked at other states that, had non-credit data, for example, like New Jersey and Oregon, but, hadn't really taken a close look at them in quite some time. And so trying to understand what was in those data. So each of these states offered us sort of a different lesson to learn. One of the other things, in New Jersey, we worked with both the higher ed data as well as Department of Labor data. A lot of the data that we've looked at here exists within community college systems, but we recognize that non-credit can exist in many different entities within a state. And so we in our the second phase of this project, we really were trying to expand out by including some State Department of Labor perspectives in that. And so we've updated our data taxonomy to include that sort of perspective and just what we've learned from this last run of states that we've worked with. All of this is being fed back into our national learning community. So that's one thing I don't want to forget to mention. That's a really important piece of this project, is knowing that states are all on this sort of journey to develop their non-credit data systems. We felt it was very important to have an opportunity to bring states together to share practice, to share the research and what we're learning from the states that we're doing research partnerships with, and then also just facilitating these conversations and connections between states that are doing this work. So we have quarterly learning community meetings that are open to anybody to join to share practices around state data. So that's the data project. And then I can share more about sort of our next phase of work that's on our next slide about sort of our ongoing work here, continuing in this effort. So as I mentioned, we have these quarterly learning community meetings that are open to anybody. One of the things that we recognize is really important is just the need for states to really kind of get down and do work around this and really talk in a lot of detail and share practice. And so led by some of our state partners who've done this work effectively, we have just launched our specialized working groups that are for state folks only. So whereas our learning community is open to anybody interested in non-credit data, the specialized working groups are for folks in states who are working with data. We have 3 different threads of work that are going on that folks are welcome to join. The first one is Data Collection 101, sort of where do I start? And it's all kinds of data collection techniques, and folks can be at different places in their data collection efforts, but that's just really about the nitty-gritty of doing data collection. Another topical area is around aligning program data with labor market information. Of course, of great interest for many, trying to get to those wage outcomes and labor market information. And then another thread of these conversations is around policy and governance, really focused on partnerships. That was a really important theme that came up through a lot of our work, was the importance of partnerships and making this all come together. As we go forward with our work, we're working with our states to document different policies and practices related to non-credit data and policy. And so that's something that will be coming out over the coming year. We're doing some more analysis of the governance structures that are in place. I think as I'm sure everyone here recognizes, there's so much variation state by state, and we're trying to get a better handle on sort of where these data live and what are some of the governance features around each state and the kind of data that need to be pulled together to get a full picture of what's happening in the non-credit and non-degree credential area. We're also actively trying to document practices, things we learn from states, and further develop toolkits to share practice with states, and continue on with research partnerships to document what's going on across a variety of state entities. So with this next phase of the project, we're going to be expanding to include more emerging data in the four-year sector, other Department of Labor perspectives, proprietary schools to the extent there are data available, a whole range of apprenticeship data, other kinds of data that are available in this realm. And with that information, we intend to update the national taxonomy to further represent kind of the full range of non-credit data that are out there, and provide just some opportunity for coordination across states as we kind of develop this common framework. So that's kind of our project in a nutshell. We have a lot of resources that are available on our website, so I encourage everyone to take a look. The first QR code and link here is just for general information to learn about our data project. The second one here is to that most recent update to our data taxonomy report, which we hope will be a very useful resource for folks. And then also for those that are within states who might be interested in joining our specialized working groups, I have Paula Nissen is our lead, who is did a fantastic job developing the system in Iowa, and who's been coordinating our specialized working groups. So folks can reach out directly to Paula if interested in joining any of those specialized working groups that I mentioned. So that's it for now, just on the project, and happy to share more as we go forward.
Thanks so much. And, I know that sometimes working at state, you can feel like you've got to figure out these really tough issues on your own. And this is a fantastic peer-to-peer learning community that Michelle and her team have been able to set up. And if you're interested in continuing on and learn more about this topic, I really would encourage you to join the national learning community as well that Michelle referenced. It's been a great learning space for me and my continued growth and knowledge around the non-degree credential space. So thanks, Michelle. So want to shift a little bit to get some state-specific perspectives. And Commissioner Gilkey, would love to get your perspective on the role that you see non-degree credentials playing in the Rhode Island post-secondary system, and talk to us a little bit about your non-degree credential data journey that Michelle referenced earlier. And Commissioner, you're still muted. If you can unmute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I think I'm here now. Thank you, John, and thank you, Strada, and certainly ECS for getting us together today. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue. Our Rhode Island's approach to non-credit training, education, and also credentials is certainly starts with the idea that most states in the country, including Rhode Island, have set goals for substantially increasing post-secondary attainment. And the shift from having attainment goals that are some are North Star ambitious, umbrella ways to bring the state together around higher education to attainment for a purpose, or attainment is where Rhode Island fits into this conversation about what do we count for attainment, what kind of credentials do we count for attainment, and then do those credentials have value in the economy and certainly for our employers and for our individuals. And so when we think about how we structure a conversation about non-credit credentials or non-credit training, it's underneath the hood of really getting understanding our state's progress towards post-secondary attainment. And so that's where we start the conversation around first, how does our data systems collect, or how do our institutions collect information about non-credit credentials or non-credit training that they, and then how do we align those credentials or that education and training for ways that help improve outcomes for our individuals and for our employer community, and certainly the state writ large. 3.5 years ago, our Rhode Island longitudinal data system, which sits in our office, the higher ed office, was tracking and collecting a lot of information around non-credit credentials and non-credit training. But we weren't measuring it against our attainment goal, and we weren't measuring against the type of clear outcomes that those individuals may have received, or our employers or state have received, because that education and training of those credentials were offered and were delivered. And the last thing I would say is we were not tracking or also understanding how many of those non-credit credentials articulated to credit at one or more of our public or private institutions. And so we're starting to really dive into those types of questions. And I think one of the quick, easy ways to describe our data system is, do our data tracking systems and our analytical processes actually help us pose and then answer those types of longitudinal questions for our for non-credit training. Our policy, so that information into how we set policy at the state level as a SHIO or coordinating agency for most of our public and private institutions. We don't have any policy jurisdiction, that we can set a credential policy for those institutions. We are also a system office for our community college and our state four-year college in Rhode Island. My office is, so we do have some policy authority as a system for those two institutions. And so it's really important that the data systems that we have and the types of things that we're asking our data systems in the realm of non-credit credentials and education and training, we'll start there. And then the third thing I would say as I wrap up is how we leverage non-credit education and training as a way to bring people into the post-secondary education experience, and then put them on a trajectory for more education over their lifetime. And we certainly took a hard look at the way our data systems provide opportunities for individuals to get into kind of for lack of a better word, a stackable pathway for post-secondary completion that's aligned to economic growth for the individual.
Right. Mr. Good. Commissioner, thanks so much for those comments, providing that perspective. And, I would just note that national data shows that about 25% of our nation's community college population is in non-credit workforce training programs. So if you are not putting in the kind of systems for collection that Commissioner Gilkey spoke to, then you're really missing a large percentage of those who are working or moving through your state's community college system. And oftentimes, as Commissioner touched on, those are those who are not otherwise connecting into your community college or your post-secondary system. So Jon, want to turn to you now, and from the Mississippi perspective, would love to hear you speak to the role that non-degree credentials play in K-12 and career and technical education in your workforce system, and how you're thinking about some of the data challenges that are associated with those credentials. So Jon, we'll turn to you.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this today and everything, and share some of the things that we're doing here in Mississippi on this topic. I'm the Chief Deputy of the Office of Schools and District Transformation, and within that office, we work with the struggling schools in the state, but we also work with, we are over CTE and workforce development in the state, and this is my first year in my position. So we're looking at evaluating where we are with the workforce development and getting students into pathways to get them to employment, with doing exposure in the lower grade levels. So kind of working on a plan there. But as far as non-degree credentials, the state is basically kind of in its third year of really focusing on national certifications for our students. So we just kind of had a post-secondary idea of what's some things out there, and especially in Rhode Island there and everything. So this, as a secondary perspective, the way Mississippi has kind of approached this is the legislature here several years ago created an organization within called Accelerate Mississippi, and they are the state's workforce development state agency. And within that agency, they have their governing board, which is the State Workforce Investment Board, or SWIB. It is the SWIB board. And so Accelerate several years ago did some research and did some tracking of data of the high-skilled, high-wage jobs that are needed in each area of Mississippi. If you've never been in Mississippi, we are very different in all the areas of our state. So we basically divided up the state into 8 ecosystems, and each area had its 5 sector strategies, which are the jobs that are going to be there when students get out of school, and are the jobs that are needed for each area of the state. So they did all that research and came up with the most prevalent and most available jobs in all the different areas across the state of Mississippi. So then, working with them, the department created a SWIB list of national certifications that are SWIB approved, and aligned those certifications to those sector strategies, to those jobs that are needed in each of the areas across the state, so that those areas and help and have research and data and pathways to put students through when they show that interest, when they're there, so that they know what jobs are there, to align the pathways that the students have in the secondary to what is going to be available for them, and what are those most outstanding jobs out there once they complete high school, go into the community colleges. What are those opportunities there that are in their area, to create a more robust workforce for each of the different areas across the state. So one of the things right there, and you can see there, the national certification list approved by the SWIB board, basically what they do is for those approved national certifications that we offer through our CTE programming, the legislator provides a $600 stipend back to the districts for every test that is passed in those national certifications that have been approved and are on the SWIB list. So that may not sound like a whole lot right off the bat, but like there are some school districts that will get an extra $100,000 in that deal because of how many students they have taking those certifications and passing those certifications, to reimbursed back to their district per passage of the students in each of those lists. So it gives back to the schools. It encourages the schools as well to make sure. Now, here's the deal: schools we're not going to push a student into an area that they don't want to go into, right? But we want to make sure that when students show interest in those sector strategies within each of the different ecosystems, that we make sure that we expose to those students those opportunities that are going to be there. And then that may, when those students hear and understand about the opportunities there, the wages that they can make, the quality of life that they can have because of the job that they are led into through that, then that might encourage them to go into those areas because they know that they're going to have a good paying job, a good quality of life of what they do in those things. So we do want to make sure that we are creating a workforce to meet the needs of all of Mississippi. And this is kind of a system to do that. And switching over to the next page, I promise you, it's a lot of stuff on there. It's really, really busy. I'm not going to go through every bit of it. But what I do want you to kind of look at is that I was a CTE director in the state probably 12, 13 years ago. And as a CTE director, coming to different conferences and meeting with people across the state, a lot of us were really starting to talk about, we need to get national certifications in our programs. We need to get national certifications in our program. Why? Because that is something that is a tangible thing that a student can have when they leave us to help them be more employable when they leave the schools, or when they go into a post-secondary option in that field, they stay in that pathway throughout that. So the last 3 to 4 years, that has really caught fire, and things take time. Like I said, it's been a while, but the national certification piece has really caught fire. And the two things I want you to look at specifically on this page are the passage rates for the last 2 years. Okay, and 2 years ago, we're at 49% passage rate of all of the certifications that are on the SWIB list, and the next year, 54%. The year before that, 2022-23 school year, when we really first started to make national certifications a priority in our CTE programs, the first year was at 24%. Okay, and then that 54% right there of this past school year, we are very proud of that, but we want to move it forward. But what people have to understand and realize, and I know most of the people in this session know this, those national certifications are written on post-secondary level. Those are tests for adults, going through and getting those national certifications. So in just our third year of really making a focus on these and working in the classrooms with our teachers to prepare our students for those national certifications, every program in the state of Mississippi that has a national certification tied to it, it is embedded in the curriculum. So they go intertwined with our curriculum that we have to ensure that we prepare students for those national certifications when they leave us, or at least prepare them enough to where if that is something they continue to pursue, they have the foundational skills to go and retake those tests and get that certification in that chosen pathway. So I'm looking forward here. I just want to kind of go over, since it is my first year here, I just want to kind of give a little of a vision of kind of where we're wanting to go, what we're looking at, and to create pathways for our students to ensure that every student is getting to where they need to be, and that we are seeing a return on our investment throughout these national certifications to our students. But we're going to create a K-12 workforce development plan. So we're going to start exposing students to careers at the kindergarten level, and it's going to be a step up every year of what that exposure piece that we have for them. Middle school, we are going to start getting their hands on equipment, start doing those things to get real world tangible things to where they're exploring all the different career paths that they may want to go into, because at the end of the day, it's what the student wants to go to and where they want to be. And I've always said that for us on our level, that it's educational malpractice if we don't expose them to all the opportunities that they have or that they may want to go into, and then they choose where they want to go, with us guiding them along the way, making sure that they are exposed to all the opportunities throughout high school, through internships, through CTE programming, going into knowing if they want to go straight into the workforce, or if they want to continue on studying at a community college, or if they're supposed to go to a 4 university. We need to make sure that we expose them to all those opportunities and give them real world tangible opportunities to get a part of that, get their hands on it, to see if that's something that they want to do or not. And then this whole thing is going to look, we're hoping to have a web-based dashboard where all these resources and everything, how to go out and how to approach a business when you're trying to do create an internship program and get them involved because you've got a student that wants to go into that programming. So we're working on that, and that is in the future and everything. And each piece that we do as far as that is going to be individualized to all those 8 ecosystems, because once again, every state is different. Every part of the state is different. They all have different opportunities and different ways to get students there. So we want to make sure that we're prescribing resources specifically to those regions. And we're going to do that by working through local economic development associations, the school districts, the local governing bodies, the community colleges there. They are a huge piece in this, because that's one of the ways that we can get our kids exposed to the equipment, exposed to those needs, to get them real world hands-on experience in those areas. But though I know that's kind of a little bit more than the non-credit degree, but just wanted to show the focus that we have put on national certifications and kind of why we feel like those are important and how we have gone strategically about matching them up with the opportunities for our students once they graduate high school.
Right. Thanks so much, Jon. Really appreciate the broad context you shared. Can you maybe speak just a little bit more about the data collection component for the national certification data and where the data comes from in terms of students that are enrolled and the path rates that you shared?
Sure. Not all programs that we have in the state of Mississippi have a national certification, because there may not be one connected to it. But each of those, each CTE program that we have that does have a national certification, of course, every test is different. They don't have any entity like the ASC auto test don't really coincide with NCCER, but we pull that data from each of those individual testing companies, and a lot of those tests have subcategories too, to where they have maybe an overall general test, and then students go through and they get different credentials by testing that. But we pull that data from each of the individual tests that those certifications that those students take, and report that to the SWIB board, and they get that, and they reimburse those allocations in those ways and those things like that.
That's great. Thanks very much. And I'll put in the chat a link to everyone to a link to an organization called CredLens, which is a new nonprofit entity that Strada has helped launch, which also might help provide some solutions to get at that national certification data for those who are looking for verified outcomes data, as well as one potential resource for the group. Michelle, would like to turn back to you. So I think we've heard a deep dive from a few states about how they're thinking about non-degree data collection issues. And I know you've got, from your perch, a really great perspective across the country about how states are approaching these issues. And would love for you to speak a little bit to what are some of the most important factors that you see for state success for building systems for non-degree data collection, and what might you be able to share for the group for what you're seeing starting to emerge there? Michelle, you were muted. So
Sorry, unmute. Okay. I think our work on the state data project can help shed some light on that, just in terms of our observations around what states have done. And so in our some of our reports, we sort of lay out various steps for states to take when you think about kind of engaging in the non-credit data journey. And foundationally, it's really important to just inventory kind of the current data that's available. And that's what we've been doing with states, is just kind of take that scan, what's there, and then you think about it step by step. Some of the states that we've been working with really, have done that, and it requires kind of thinking hard about what's most essential to work on building and prioritize, and begin with those essentials, and then work on building and adding over time to the data infrastructure. It's important. We've heard from states to think about interconnectivity and different platforms that allow for that. Which leads to the other piece that's really important in tandem with all of this, is the importance of data partnerships to collect outcomes data. So whether it's with national entities like CredLens, or with other folks within the state ecosystem, possibly where data can be shared. There's a lot of need to sort of think across different data silos, and as I said, sort of that leads us to another point we have, which is really thinking about how to engage statewide, and also think about sort of national resources that are available. So I think those are definitely some goals here, as we think about, the states. I think where we want to get to, I think, is, to have a more comprehensive understanding about non-degree credentials and their outcomes, and have that, on the full range of students who go through those programs to see if they're really meeting their expectations, meeting their goals, serving their needs. And so that does require that partnership building and thinking about, reaching across systems. But that's our end goal, is we want to understand all the students who experience non-degree credentials. And for states, it's super important to think about how that aligns with funding and other policy priorities. But I think it is a challenge to think about how to bring in all the students and then to bring in all the entities within a state that are engaged in this kind of work. I think, we're in this moment where, the governance structures possibly haven't quite caught up with where all the practice is. And so there's a little bit of a challenge there. But anyway, I'll stop. Those are just some general thoughts, I think, on what we've been learning from our work.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. And really to shift to our state leaders and ask that both Shannon and Jon kind of respond and share with this. But I've spent time with community colleges that had like Excel spreadsheets to track non-credit student enrollment, and that was totally distinct from their credit side of the house. I've worked with high school CTE directors that had to go around and really ask the teachers to pull out their handwritten notes about who is earning certifications to try to bring in this data. So, as you think about building out like state systems, how do you shift from this type of data, which historically was not really maybe tracked in the same way that college for credit credentials were tracked, or that high school, course data or the other information has been tracked, to building out a statewide system, and what sort of challenges have your states faced, and how have you been able to address them?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one, Jon. So I'd go back to my former employer, the Kentucky Community College and Technical System. We, when I was there, in charge of all the workforce training divisions for the 16 colleges, we articulated college credit for all non-credit training. The students, by design of customized workforce training, there was an articulation agreement that students would receive credit for that. So that articulation or required articulation at the system level forced a data collection into the credit side of the house. So that's one way that a state has done it. KCTCS has done it. In Rhode Island, the last year, actually, we've really expanded the scope of our longitudinal data system, or our longitudinal data ecosystem, by being a lot more inclusive in who gets to participate in that data system. And the reason for that, at least from a post-secondary, very selfish post-secondary perspective, is because we know that workforce training happens all over the state outside of post-secondary, and also even if you include our Department of Labor and Training, which does quite a bit of workforce training as well. So we know our Department of Transportation does quite a bit of workforce training, non-credit workforce training. Our healthcare system does a lot of non-credit workforce training. And so if we take the perspective that those are the individuals that are receiving some type of education and training that could be on a pathway to greater post-secondary completion, then we need to have our data system needs to have a holistic viewpoint on how we collect, track, define, and evaluate what the outcomes are in those education and training experiences, and then what the alignment is to greater economic well-being for the individual and for the company. And so I'd say the first one is creating a data ecosystem that's much more participatory across the government agencies, and not just siloed into post-secondary. And the other reason for that's unique to New England and certainly Rhode Island and maybe other parts of the country is that we have a big demographic shift. We have every year more and more of the people aging out of the workforce. And so our post-secondary attainment number actually declined last year from 57% of our working population to 55 and some change, because people with education are aging out of the workforce. And at the same time, we're part of the enrollment cliff in this part of the country, where we have less students coming from K-12 into post-secondary. So our demographic situation is going to require us to be much, much more effective and efficient in the way we educate and train people, because we're going to see a decline in the number of people that are qualified to work in these industries. So getting very effective and inclusive across our data systems and ecosystems, if you will, so that every Rhode Islander has an opportunity to be on a path to greater employment opportunity for, post-secondary education. We're going to have to be able to attract those things, evaluate them, and then assign clear, aligned outcomes to what we're producing.
Absolutely. And, I think as we see job roles change with AI, as we see other shifts for the economic landscape, and adults will need to get retrained, and oftentimes will not want to go through a full 2 or 4 year degree program, but we'll be looking for these shorter term credential opportunities. So having that data on participants and outcomes becomes more and more important. Jon, is there anything you'd like to add on kind of the state data system perspective? Any lessons that you've learned about how to build out some state systems in this space that are scalable?
Yes, like I said, this is my first in the job, so we're going to be looking at doing some things, tracking data to see what return on investment we're getting with some things that we're doing. But currently, we are every CTE student that comes through, and that doesn't mean everyone that gets a national certification or credential like that, but we track for 1 year currently, and I think we need to track them beyond that. But we're gonna try to have some systems into place to see if, and right now some of the data we have is showing that not a high enough percentage of our students who go through our CTE programs are going into either a post-secondary program that aligns or going into that field. So we're wanting to kind of use that data to kind of see how we can improve that. We have a couple of years ago, we started a career coaching initiative throughout the state where we have career coaches in the high schools, kind of doing some of the things that you would typically think in the past that a counselor would do, showing you what's out there and stuff. But counselors, their job has gotten crazy in this world, in the world of education. So most of the schools in Mississippi now, high schools now have a career coach. And so we're going to create a reporting system to kind of see what return on investment we're getting with those career coaches, coaching those students to the career paths, seeing if it's aligning with what they're doing in the world of CTE, hopefully aligning in what they're doing with their internships. So that we can see exactly how that program that career coach program is working and getting kids to some of the different areas and what they're going into post-secondary.
Great. Thanks so much, Jon. I'll ask one more question for the panelists, but just want to say to the audience, if you do have any questions, put them in the Q&A. I think we might have time for 1 or 2 questions from the Q&A that's submitted. But I want to talk a little bit as you're collecting this data, right? It's very important to make sure this data is getting out to stakeholders to kind of understand both where are credential programs available, and also, as you're able to get the outcomes data, what are the outcomes that are associated with them? And we'd love for any of the panelists, either Michelle from your role, to see what you're seeing for successful state models around data transparency for non-degree credentials, or Commissioner Gilkey or Jon, like how are you thinking about that issue of data transparency around non-degree credentials? Would love to get some perspectives on that.
Well, I'll start off. With us being the Department of Education, the governing agency of the education, the state of Mississippi, we are always needing to be very transparent with our data, with our legislatures, with Accelerate. So we are very transparent with the data, because like even that 54% own those credentials that the students are getting, we are pushed to improve those, and we need to improve those. It needs to be a growing deal. We need to get better and better at it each and every year, so that we're having more students be successful in those areas. So we're even taking that sheet right there, the data that I showed you there, and seeing where do we need to improve to be able to get in that reporting data right there, to get where do we need to put our resources in for training for teachers across the state in what specific areas to get those specific credentials up and everything. But yes, we present that data to the SWIB board and Accelerate every year. Very transparent, because we want them to see exactly what some of the money from the legislature, what it's going into and what the outcomes from that are.
Yeah, this is something we're wrestling with right now as we try to really invest in infrastructure in this education and economy space, and the data needed to inform decision makers. And when we think about it in our planning efforts right now, Jon, we're thinking about who needs to consume this information to make good decisions. Certainly legislators, certainly people in our offices, but it's Rhode Island families that need to have consumer information at the kitchen table when they're trying to decide what CTE program, should I, enroll in, and then is that CTE program have a industry credential, and is it aligned to credit bearing at the K-12 level? And then same for post-secondary. Am I enrolling myself into a program that doesn't have a clear economic outcome? And then also our business leaders. And so if our business leaders, small, medium, and large, have a way to consume information that they can see their talent pipelines and where those gaps are going to be, today, tomorrow, 5 years from now. So, looking at, when I think about data transparency, we obviously want to be as transparent with the as what federal and state policy allows us to be, but I think of it as who can consume this information in a simple way so they can make decisions that will benefit themselves, and that benefits the whole state from an economic and workforce perspective.
Thank you. Michelle, any state models you would want to point to around transparency?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we're highlighting, as I mentioned, we're kind of trying to document different practices across states, where we have some briefs that we'll be releasing over the next couple of months, but one of them focuses on dashboards. And so we have seen some models across different states of having data dashboards to share information on non-credit program outcomes. So one of those examples is in Iowa. You can go through and look up programs and see sort of outcomes, including employment outcomes. So that's one example. Maryland, the Maryland Higher Ed Commission also has created a dashboard where you can get information across different kinds of courses and course sequences. And Virginia as well also provides information on this through their data dashboard. So I think these are, different elements, and we'll have a brief that will share a lot more detail on each of these states in terms of what they're doing. But I do think that that's that's certainly something we're tracking, is, making this data publicly available. Now, of course, the next big question mark is, how do you get that data from being publicly available to being publicly consumed and used, at those kitchen tables, to have people, in the hands of people who can, use it to make decisions. And that's another question. But I do think that sort of having those resources available is a very important first step.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will look forward to sharing out the research brief through our networks as well. One thing I would really encourage states to think about also is that if you have open data portals where you can share aggregate data sets, that's more and more important in our AI infused world, that more families and learners and adults are getting their data through chatbots as opposed to dashboards. And states can really do a lot to make sure that those chatbots are using high quality structured data that has some of the information that you put out about the programs, by how they structure that and put that out into the world. So, as you think about your dashboard strategies at the state level, we encourage you to also think about your open data strategies and make sure those are going on in parallel. I think we've got one last question from the Q&A that I'm going to pose, and then I'll turn it back to Shai to help wrap us up. But this is a really great question about tips for best engaging education partners, like your higher education partners and maybe school districts within this work, that you oftentimes might have differing thoughts on the purposes of credentials and their roles to college and the workforce. So maybe Commissioner Gilkey, if you can speak to how you have engaged your kind of college constituents. Jon will maybe have you speak to how you're engaging kind of school district leaders in this work, and then we'll turn it back to Shai to wrap us up here.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So first, I look at, education outcomes with serving two clients, the individual Rhode Islander, and then our business and industry leaders to see if our education solutions, credentials are serving those clients, and then obviously the state writ large at the aggregate level. And so when we think about engaging with our colleges, we kind of start with those two at the forefront of the conversation. And then the second that comes up because of our demographic shifts and just the nature of the national conversation around value and the value proposition of higher education right now is what the impacts that's going to have on enrollment for the institution, and how we promote enrollment, because we want our institutions to thrive. We want to do them with clear outcomes aligned to the needs of our state, and that is the starting point of our conversation, whether it's the development or revision of a 2-year program, 4-year program, PhD, medical school, or a non-credit credential. And then the third thing I would say in that conversation is alignment in transition spaces. So transition from K-12 to post-secondary and post-secondary to the economy. And if we can have that stage of conversation with that kind of framing, we're much more likely to develop a solution, a post-secondary solution that's going to benefit the individual, the state, and certainly sustain the college.
Thank you so much. Jon, thoughts on how to best engage your district leaders in these conversations around non-degree credentials and certifications?
That's it. Just building relationships, having conversations, and it's going on with the piece right there between secondary and post-secondary, and how you get everyone to the table. A lot of times, like in this world, education thinks that they know what the business world needs and won't. The business world thinks that they know how to educate kids and everything, and nobody talks, nobody communicates. So what we found is, and there's sometimes there's that little barrier between the two and things like that. We've learned that engaging in strong conversation, and meeting and finding out, what exactly is it that you need? Here's what we need, working together to find that common ground. In some of the districts in the district I've worked in, that's how we built a successful 7-year K-12 workforce development plan with a robust internship program of getting students 100 paid hours at no cost to the student, no cost to the business or anything like that. Getting those in the meaningful program that they think their career path that they believe they want to go into. Finding out how to get through the workman comp issues and things like that. Having those conversations, I believe, is the number one way to get things going. And what the commissioner just spoke about is that alignment. This is funny you brought that up. We had a meeting last week. In our state, we have a very strong community college system. And so, but as far as the workforce development deal, there are some places that we have to line up and not in curriculum, pathways for students to make sure that they're aligned with the way that they're going, dual credit alignment and those kind of things. And it's funny, we had a meeting, a very good meeting with a lot of our community college partners last week, to where I think some people were coming in not ready to work together. And then because of the way everything was approached by both sides, and the communication and hey, we know we don't know everything. Let's work together and figure it out. By the end of the meeting, everyone was like, hey, I think we're fixing to make some changes in the things that we can do, and this, that, and the other. When everybody is on the same page, but it's just, and I know I may not answer the question directly, but I think building relationships with people and getting in the same room and sitting down and knowing that I don't have all the answers. Let's do what's best for the students in our state, to get them to where they need to be, and create those systems that gets them to where they need to be.
Thanks so much, Jon. Appreciate that perspective. And these are human relationships and communications need to drive the progress forward. But really appreciate the fantastic insights from our panelists today. I will turn it back over to the ECS team.
Thank you, Jon. Well, we've covered a lot of ground on the evolving role of credentials of value in state post-secondary and workforce strategy. I want to thank you all for bringing your perspectives and experiences to the table. We really appreciate each of you joining us. And a huge applause for Jon Furr, Michelle Van Noy, Shannon Gilkey, and Jon Furr for their insightful contributions to today's conversation. Join me in thanking them. To our audience, please remember that Education Commission of the States is here to support you in your work. And we trust that you're taking away at least one idea. We have so many resources in the chat. Thank you for including those. So we hope you're taking at least one idea from today's webinar that your state can draw from. If you have questions or requests related to today's session, please don't hesitate to reach out to ECS. You can reach out to me directly, and as it pertains to this webinar. And as I mentioned, today's recorded session will be shared in your post-event email. And finally, we're happy to share that registration is now open for the next Partnering for Success webinar in our 3-part series with Strada. This upcoming session will focus on strengthening alignment between post-secondary education and workforce data through the PSEO, or Post-Secondary Employment Outcomes Coalition. The webinar will take place on May 15th, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and there should be a link in the chat where you can register. So register today. Thank you again for joining us today, and enjoy your afternoon. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.